Quality team. I'm the grant coordinator. I am here with a bunch of my teammates, and I'll let them introduce themselves, I guess, later. But just maybe quickly, I'll tell you that Josh is here, Simone is here, Tony's here, Jesse is here from CFP. And today we're going to talk about the integration of the data inventory and the school continuous improvement plan. We're also going to cover steps of the process, the importance of baseline data, share the timeline, and answer any questions you may have. Speaking of questions, we will answer questions in the chat, so please put them in there, and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. If there's something you're dying to know an answer to or something, please just put your hand up and we can, you'll unmute yourself and you can ask us a question, or we can answer your question right away in the chat. All right. So that's the agenda I just went over, and I think, Jesse, it's you to take it away.
Thanks so much. So we wanted to start the conversation today by framing really the reasons for these revisions. And most importantly, we have revised the what used to be two different templates, the SIP template and the previous SWP template, to now be all within one template. So there is now one school level template that will meet all federal and state requirements. So that was really the intention of these revisions. We've also heard from the field over the past few years that there was general confusion about what was actually really required for LEAs and for schools. And so by integrating all these requirements within one template, we hope to clarify what those expectations are, what the statutory requirements are, and really make it a little bit simpler for all schools and then therefore their LEAs to meet all requirements utilizing this template. So now with this new template, it's a school level plan, and that is because school level plans are required for every school in the state. That is, again, goes back to actually a state requirement as well as federal requirements. These plans should be revised at least annually so that they're sort of continuously being updated to reflect current needs. And then the plans must be based on school level, school specific data and assessed needs. So these requirements are all from federal statute, state law, education quality standards, et cetera. And so this new template will sort of allow schools to kind of follow the template and meet all of these requirements within this template. And overall, really that purpose of the integration is to streamline these requirements, to support the compliance for LEAs in schools. We want to set schools and LEAs up for success to be able to demonstrate compliance with the law and ensure that you all have all the required documentation that you might need for any monitoring or anything like that. This integration also aims to hopefully promote the collective responsibility of both schools and LEAs that they share with this purpose, with the intention of these programs. So no one person or position should be responsible for ensuring the compliance of all these state and federal requirements. And this process really helps to support the differentiated roles of the school community and the leadership at the school from the LEA leadership with the cyclical process. By holding all schools and LEAs to the same expectations by utilizing this one template of improvement planning and documentation, the revised template supports the intention of providing quality educational experiences to all students across the state. So again, that is really part of the intention of this integration. And furthermore, hopefully it is helpful for you all as much as it is for us, that this really encourages the alignment between different divisions within the AOE. So in this instance, our Consolidated Federal Programs team and the Education Quality team. And we're finding that to be really important for our work and our support of the field. We've also had quite a number of questions about the sort of how and when these templates should be used and sort of the process in general, how the annual needs assessment process and the school improvement process sort of are integrated with these templates themselves. So in simplest terms, that first step of the process will be that required comprehensive needs assessment that you all are probably pretty familiar with. This is that sort of overarching process during which the schools and the LEAs will collect and review various types of data, and that will be used to help them determine your needs. Then the next step will be for the data and summarized needs to be documented as evidence within the data inventory document. So really that data inventory template is sort of that evidence document where you're going to put all of the summarized data and needs. Once you have documented that in your data inventory and done your needs assessment, the schools will then use that information to develop and revise the school improvement plans. And at the same time, sort of simultaneously based on the due dates of when the grant application is open and the timeline of doing the school improvement plans, sort of in conjunction with each other, you're also going to be writing in relevant strategies into the grant application. So you're going to be developing your schools or the school's improvement plans, and also then investing those strategies from the school improvement plans into the grant applications. And then all throughout the year, as part of this cyclical process, there's going to be ongoing progress monitoring to really kind of review what you're doing and revise as needed. So identifying new needs, and then again, amending either the data inventory if there's new data that has come up or new needs that you need to summarize included in the data inventory, revising those continuous improvement plans, or the grant application itself if you need to actually invest in new strategies. So that sort of continuous progress monitoring and then amending of the data inventory, school improvement plans, or grant applications is going to continue on throughout the year. And I think Josh has this next slide, so I'm going to let Josh take it over.
Thanks, Jesse. As Jesse said, as part of the continuous improvement process, a comprehensive needs assessment is conducted so that schools can analyze multiple sources of data from four main categories: demographic data, student outcome data, school process data, and perception data. From these data analyses, schools can identify assets and challenges of specific problems of practice, as well as underlying root causes. Our comprehensive needs assessment toolkit and website resources can support teams in this process. The results of your needs assessment will be documented in the data inventory template, which will support the development of your goals and strategies in your CIP. Next slide. There we go. Thank you. Baseline data. So I just want to stress the importance of baseline data, which is the data that you have available to you when developing your continuous improvement plan. As you already know, you check in on the implementation of your continuous improvement plan throughout the school year. You monitor implementation, you compare data you're collecting to your baseline data, and you can use any data source as your baseline data. And the most commonly used data is from your local assessments and other local data. I'll reference to the previous slide and say it's important to remember that baseline data can be demographic, student outcome, school process, and perception data. So here's an example of when you would use your baseline data when developing your CIP timeline. So you develop and submit your CIP using the baseline data you have available to you. So you're doing that in June 2025, and you're doing that to develop the 2025-26 school year CIP. You're going to monitor implementation of that CIP mid-year in January. It'd be 2026 and the end of the year. So when meanwhile, as you're implementing that plan, you will also be developing and submitting your 2026-27 CIP using the baseline data we talked about that's available to you at that time. So the most recent data. So there will be some overlap. Next slide, I think, is Jesse's.
It is.
Back over to you.
Yep. All right. So to kind of go over the role of the data inventory itself acts really as that documented evidence of a comprehensive needs assessment process that has taken place. And really the specific data that ultimately was used during that comprehensive needs assessment is going to be used or was used to determine those specific needs of the school. So The AOE uses this to confirm that there is a need for an activity and that there's actually data to support that need. And then also we use it to justify the reasonableness and necessity of each investment that's funded in the CFP or the SI grants. And more about the data inventory. The data inventory collects data really for the LEA as a whole. This data is summarized into various different categories that are related to specific title programs. So you might be able to kind of take a look at the data inventory, those different categories, and kind of identify which title is related to that. But there are many different titles that actually can support the needs of those different categories. So for example, some of the different types of categories are English language learners, safe and healthy schools, effective use of technology, professional development, or recruitment and retention. You may be able to use Title I or Title II for some of those, or Title I or Title IV for some of those different types of categories. So we're trying to get you to sort of think about the sort of the theme of those categories and make connections between the various needs that you might have within your LEA and then connect them back to available title sources. The data inventory also collects school-specific data in the school-specific section, and those categories that are sort of prompted for completing within the tables, the school tables, are related to the ESSA accountability indicators. So you'll see literacy, math, science, chronic absenteeism, college and career readiness, and graduation rate. There's also some options for you to, or for your schools to include additional data if they have, during their needs assessment, identified other areas that they would like to focus on. So other academic subject areas or other focus areas that they really find there is a need at their school and they want to incorporate those. They have the chance to add that in there as well. And the school-specific section really should support the school's continuous improvement plan. That is going to be reviewed as part of that school continuous improvement plan review process. And then it also should support the school-specific investments that are written into this grant. So if you have investments that you're writing for a particular school, you want to make sure that there is data that supports that particular investment within their school section. So this slide might be a little bit small for you all to read. Hopefully you can see it. But one of the main revisions of the DI, as we said, is that school-specific section. So part 3, this slide is showing sort of a screenshot of a sample filled, completed school section. Wanted to kind of provide you an example of what that might look like. So previously, only schools that operated a Title I school-wide program, also called an SWP, were required to enter the school-specific data in the data inventory. So this will be a change this year, because the data inventory will be used as the documentation of school-specific data in a school needs assessment process. Moving forward, every school in the LEA will need that school-specific data entered into this part. So they'll need their own sort of table. You can copy and paste for the number of schools that exists within your LEA and ensure that every school has that table completed. And that section will be reviewed during the grant application review when determining, again, the necessity and reasonableness of a school level investment, but it will also be reviewed with each school's continuous improvement plan as evidence of the school specific data that was reviewed during the school needs assessment. So again, the slide with the screenshots show examples of the kinds of data and the summarized needs that might be included in the school specific section. The data, you might notice that the data and needs mirror the broader LEA level data and needs. That's absolutely okay, but the content in here should be specific to that particular school. So the sort of results and data should be school specific, even if it's similar to what the LEA's data says. So just to kind of summarize, overall, each LEA will have one data inventory within which, under part 3, the school specific section, you will include a completed table for each school within the LEA.
And here is some information regarding school CIPs. Schools submit their CIP annually, and we have a new template with the instructions that go with it. You will notice that the updated CIP is similar to what we have used in the past. So there is a section for stakeholders, goals and measures of improvement, and evidence-based change ideas. Main changes include Act 139 goals and resource allocation section. The other components remain as they were. Some new components are goals relating to Act 139, such as reading proficiency required for K-3 schools, and equitable resource allocation only for schools identified for CS, TSI, and ATSI. You should continue to maintain SUSD and LEA level systemic goals and strategies for improvement and plans. However, for this year, an LEA level plan submission to the AOE is not a requirement. This may change in the future, considering district quality standards expectations. School goals must address academic achievement and safe, healthy, and school environments as described in 16 DSA Section 165. Goals must be clear and measurable and about student outcomes. Include what is being improved, for whom, that is the target student population or populations, by when, and by how much. Goals should also explicitly address any equity, achievement, opportunity gaps between student populations. Also, please ensure that strategies adhere to Title I school-wide program requirements. It is best practice to limit the CIP goals to a manageable number to implement and measure. Next slide. And here is a summary for you of a visual of the PDSA cycle. The model for improvement is looking at clear, measurable goals, which are the first steps in developing the driver program. What are you trying to improve? How will you know that the change is an improvement? And what change can make, yes, that's a slide, that's good. And what change can we make that will result in improvement? You should be looking at data to see the progress you have made. Okay, and next is Tony.
Thank you, Simona. So here's an example of how goals might be developed using disaggregated data analysis from the comprehensive needs assessment process. So in this example, disaggregated data for English learners reveals many potential needs across multiple data categories. So for example, student learning data shows significant gaps in proficiency between EL and non-EL student populations. And on the local and state assessments, only 10% of EL students in grades K-3 are proficient in reading standards. Next slide, Mayor. So recall that setting clear, measurable student learning goals entails 4 basic criteria: the what, for whom, by when, and by how much. The what component operationalizes the specific skills, processes, and practices that are being improved. The for whom component identifies the intended population for whom the goal is set. The by when component identifies what you expect outcomes to be achieved. And the by how much component indicates the degree of importance you expect will be made by that time. So in this case, the highlighted examples show specific goals related to the data findings for English learners. Next slide.
All right, thank you, Tony. So based on the goals from the previous slide and the underlying problems of practice related to the goal, you can use a root cause analysis or cause and effect diagram, which is shown here, to uncover and confirm the underlying root causes of the challenges to ensure that you are solving the right problem. In this example, the problem of practice we're using is most of our English learners in grades K-3 are not meeting reading proficiency levels. So then you brainstorm broad categories of causes, which are the areas here shown in blue. Then you'd brainstorm and record the list of causes for each category you have chosen. The broad categories in this example are resources, skills, knowledge, measures and data, environment and process. There's also examples of this on our webpage. We provided the link to that earlier. And now Simona will walk us through the next steps.
On this slide, you'll see some potential root causes of the previous problem of practice. So newly arrived families with very little experience in using the English language, absenteeism is limiting exposure to instruction, lack of strong systematic phonics instruction in the early grades, insufficient time with practicing reading and the fluency exercises, minimal, if any, small group instruction and interventions, inconsistency with instructional and intervention practices, lack of structure from DST, and teacher confidence in content knowledge and pedagogical practice in SOR. And the next slide, we have evidence-based change ideas can be selected based on the problems of practice, root causes, and intended goals. The implementation and efficacy of these change ideas will be what you are monitoring often in your PDSA inquiry cycles. And Tony is next.
Thank you, Simona. So in this example, the change ideas include using recommended practices within the IES practice guides. So to integrate intensive small group reading interventions, extensive vocabulary instruction, and peer-assisted learning opportunities for EL students, monitoring progress every 3 weeks. So here you can see we are getting very specific on the practices that will be implemented and monitored through the PDSA cycles. Next slide. So prior to implementing your PDSA cycles, you also want to ensure that you have measures in place to determine if or how the practices were implemented and how you will measure the efficacy, success of the change in relation to student learning goals. In this example, implementation is measured using teacher surveys, lesson plan artifacts, and learning walk observations. Student learning outcome measures include the state local assessment results for long-term outcomes and oral reading fluency measures and other formative assessments for shorter-term progress monitoring. Next slide, and Josh, I think you're up.
Josh, you're muted.
Sorry, I was muted there for a second. So here's how this example all comes together in the driver diagram, your theory of improvement, which includes the contents of the CIP template that you can all see here. Those are the clear, measurable goals, the evidence-based change ideas, and the measures you will use to assess progress. The primary drivers refer to the high-level factors that directly influence achieving your desired outcomes. The secondary drivers are specific actions needed or components to positively impact those primary drivers. You can think of these drivers as like building blocks to reach your larger goal within your CIP. In addition to that, you'll want to just consider what resources you will need to carry out the plan. For example, some fiscal, human, and material resources. Back to you, Tony.
Thanks, Josh. So there we go. So as you're implementing the practices and collecting the measurement data, you can use this PDSA protocol framework to monitor progress. This image illustrates the framework for the PDSA cycle, including guiding questions to consider during each of the phases. In the plan phase, questions include how, where, when, and with whom will the practice be implemented? What do you predict will happen as a result of implementing this practice? In the do phase, you carry out the practice as intended and collect relevant data. During the study phase, guiding questions include what implementation of the practice carried out the plan, what implementation of the practice carried out as planned, what have you learned and how you're making sense of the results? Did these results match your predictions, and what did you observe that was surprising? Finally, during the act phase, guiding questions include regarding the change idea, how much you need to adapt or strengthen it to meet the needs of all students, and does our theory of improvement or Dreyer diagram need to be refined, and how so? Next slide. And then, while not documented on the school level SIPs, you want to continue best practices for creating LEA goals, level goals, and improvement strategies. In this example, using the same CNA process and data types for analysis, you may have uncovered inconsistencies and variability in curriculum, instructional practices, and proficiency levels in literacy. Therefore, you might want to set goals to create coherence and consistency in curriculum, instructional practices, and students meeting grade level standards in literacy. Strategies for achieving these goals may include the adoption of common curriculum and high leverage evidence-based practices for foundational skills comprehension and vocabulary, as well as the provision of common professional learning for curriculum delivery and instructional practices. Next slide, please.
Okay. LEAs are responsible for ongoing monitoring of the school plans. All schools must monitor their progress toward goals at least annually. Schools eligible for CSI, TSI, ATSI must update and submit mid-year progress no later than February 28th and end-of-year results no later than June 30th. Schools eligible for CSI, TSI, ATSI will have regular monthly check-ins with their EQC to discuss implementation and progress. Next slide. All schools identified and not identified must upload for schools on CIPs, they must upload their CIP in the GMS. CIP must be completed between May 1 and September 30th each year. CIP can be updated and developed at any time based on local needs. For identified schools only, the CIP must address the reason or reasons for identification. Then for all LEAs, upload completed DI with individual school tables for each school with CFP application submission by June 30th. And then you'll have a mid-year progress monitoring by June 28th and end-of-year monitoring again by June 30th. And next, we are going to take your questions, which have already been dropped in the chat. And I can start reading from those. Okay. Bianca is asking, I read the directions for the DI. I write the directions for the DI, but I wonder about definitions for specific data points such as graduation rate. What should we use when we determine that data? As you know, there are many ways to interpret various terms.
I guess I can take that. So we don't have a particular, I guess, need for you to use any one particular data set or another. You all can choose the data that best is reflective of your data analysis process or what means the most to you within the context of your LEA, your school, that sort of thing. So if, for example, you're referring to the difference between like 4-year graduation versus 5-year graduation versus 6-year graduation, as long as you clarify that within your data inventory on what you're actually looking at, I think that's fine. You might want to include multiple, and that's okay. And then you might, if you're, in terms of like selecting which type of math result or which type of literacy result, like we're not going to dictate that. You all can select the one that you have, that you use, that means the most to you, that you think is most effective. So we don't define like the exact type of data point you need. We're just going to define the sort of broader category within that so that you start thinking about those, the needs in those areas. If anyone else has
Mama.
anything to add, feel free to jump in as well.
Okay, if we think we have covered that, Jen is asking for the school-specific data. Are elementary schools expected to provide data in the areas of graduation rate and college career readiness? Are these categories able to be modified for these levels?
So I can speak for the CFP team, and if you all want to add anything from the SIP review standpoint, you are welcome to. You do not, for the CFP purpose, we're not going to necessarily look to see content for the graduation rate or college and career readiness for an elementary school. If you are able to modify that sort of, again, with that broad category in mind and modify it to sort of reflect an actual need within your elementary school, that's absolutely fine. But it's not going to be a requirement for, there might be some where you say like NA, for example. I imagine that will be the case for graduation rate for elementary schools, for example.
And I guess connected to that, Bryn is asking, similarly to Jen's question, is there being clarification about whether middle high schools can skip the Act 139 goal setting section in the CIP?
So
Yes.
I can answer that. So yeah, so section 2A, I believe it is the Act 139 section, and that is only to be done for schools with K through 3. So if you are not a K through 3 school, you can just skip that section. You will need to fill out section 2, but not section 2A.
Similarly, if we have an SD that has one building at each grade level, we may have identical data for BTCAP. For example, SD has grades 3 through 9. 11 and high school, for example, has the exact data for 9 and 11 as SD. I assume we should list it in each place.
Yeah, I think if you have only one school that is reflective of your LEA's data, you can include that same information in the school specific section. But I would also encourage you to not only use like the VTCAP state assessment data, for example, for your school's review, and also for your LEAs, honestly, that you can use other benchmarking data and other assessments that, you know, your local assessments as well. So even though this is our state template, you are encouraged to use your local assessment data as the data sources, not just the state assessment.
Jen was checking whether the LEA CIP is not needed this year. I already answered in the chat, but just for everyone's benefit, you will not need to submit it this year, but you are always expected to prepare it. Kosha is asking if this slideshow is available on the AOE website, and Lori answered that there are a series of recorded PowerPoint slides on continuous improvement processes on this section of our website, and it's listed in the chat. You can click on the chat and open that link. Once this meeting is over, you will not be able to access the chat anymore, so you might want to open and possibly bookmark that site before the end of this presentation. Can we complete the CIP before May 1? I have already begun the process for FY26, starting with the CNA.
Right.
I think the idea is that, yes, you can work on it at any time. The submission window isn't going to officially open, though, in GMS until May 1. So it might be completed already, but I just don't think you'll be able to like actually upload it in GMS until then.
Yes, that's correct, Jesse. Yes. Yep. Sorry, I was on mute. I went to speak and I forgot I was on mute. But yes, you can certainly work on it, and maybe it is completed before, but you won't be able to submit it until we open the window in GMS. So yes, Jesse's correct.
And connected, then when is the CIP due by this year? Yeah, that slide. Tony, you want to take that?
Sure. So the SIP will be due September 30th. But we will need to use that to verify any investments. So if you are expecting to spend money July 1, if you're a school eligible for comprehensive supports, you would need to get that in prior to September 30th, or you'd have to have that money sit there until we actually review your application. So it's kind of tied to the funding piece as well. But you do have until September 30th.
And I hadn't seen that Lori had already answered in part the question by saying that we extended the timeline in case you wish to complete work over the summer months.
So if you wanted to include the newer data that you're receiving, so this is the dilemma with the timeline, the various timelines. So we're trying to get on a timeline for assessment release and identifications that aligns better with the school year. That doesn't quite align with the CFP timeline, so there are requirements that you need to meet there. But I think, Jesse, you'd said that you don't need a fully approved CIP in order to start that process. So the idea is this is open for you to make any additions, changes, like when you receive that newer data that you might want to make at that time. Is that all accurate, Jesse, on your end?
Yeah, for the CFP application, that's correct. We will use the data inventory as the evidence for the need and the data for, to support the investments. So that's, again, how the data inventory kind of integrates to this process. So yes, your data inventory will need to be completed by June 30. But if you are, and that's why, if you remember back on the slide that kind of showed the arrow with the timeline, those two components of like developing your school SIPs and writing your investment strategies were sort of at the same time, right? Because you're going to be, from both of those, basing it off of the data inventory that was already completed in the prior step. So we are going to look at the data inventory as the evidence for something being necessary and reasonable. And that's going to be the sort of required upload in your CFP application still. And then if you are continuing to, finalize the school's plans are actually continuing to be sort of like finalized, and final drafts are being, revised here or there over the summer, but they're all based on that same data that was already uploaded by June 30th, then that should be fine.
I think Jennifer's question, which came next, has probably been addressed by these answers, but Jennifer, if you still need clarifications, let us know. And Bianca, can we require all schools to connect to Act 139, although not require beyond K through 3?
I personally think that's an LEA decision. If you want all of your schools to also write a literacy specific goal, I think that's fine. That's my opinion. And
Jesse, Kasia is another question. Has the federal PD daily rate changed? She's asking that specifically of you.
Yes, I appreciate that question. We are reviewing that currently, and we'll absolutely let you know for next year what changes we have determined.
Bianca is offering to come out of mute, but she already has the question here. I can start reading it and see how far we can get. Based on our DI and CIP, we may adjust how we use coaches if we want to invest in an instructional coach and write that in our FY26 grant application. Can we hire before it is approved, knowing it is not approved? We would have to fund it locally. Each year we have coaches approved in our grant, and they stay on year to year. So I am just trying to figure out how we hire new positions written in as new investments if the approval is delayed.
That's a good question. I can kind of touch on that. And again, if anyone has anything else to add, they can jump in. So for the CFP application, because it's all based, it's all formula grants, you are offered what is called substantial approval as long as you get your application in before the grant money is officially available on July 1, which is why we have the deadline of June 30th. As long as you get that in by June 30th, then as of July 1, anything that is written into your grant has what is called substantial approval. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that every single thing that you write is ultimately going to get final approval. If there's something that's written in there that's just straight up not allowed, right, then we'll have to reject it and you will have to then switch that and fund that locally. But if you know that the sort of the activity that you're planning that you wrote into the grant is otherwise an allowable, reasonable, necessary activity, eligible, meeting one of the intents of one of the titles, then you will have substantial approval, even if we return it for like, you need to add this data piece in there, or you need to add a little bit more information about the duration or the FTE or something like that. We might still return it back and forth for further details. But ultimately, if it is an approvable activity, then you can cover that through the grant starting July 1. And if you have questions about whether or not some activity that you have is a potential eligible activity, you can always reach out to us ahead of time. Instructional coaches just across the board, I'm going to say, are approvable. So, if that's the one that you're thinking of, then you're probably pretty fine to move forward. But if there's a new position that you've never done before, or if there's a new activity that you're not sure if it will ultimately be allowable, then it's always good to check in with us before you're just sort of like hanging your hat on the fact that you have substantial approval, because we can't guarantee that something will finally get approved. But as long as it meets the intent and is reasonable and all of those other things, then even if we have to pass it back for some further detail, it will be okay.
As a follow-up, Jesse, Bianca is asking, so we would have to wait until July 1st to hire?
So a contract would have to, if it's being funded by the title funds, then the contract would start July 1. If you're trying to do something for this current year, using your current year funds, that's a different story. That would be done during an amendment process, and we can definitely talk about that. But if you're talking about for next year, it would start July 1.
Bianca, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So thank you. I'm thinking, for example, if we were to adjust coaching positions, I may have current coaches who want to apply, because like if I say I have a literacy coach that I'm no longer going to write into my grant, but I'm going to adjust the coaching model, and people might want to apply to make that change, or a classroom teacher might want to apply to become a coach. Even though the contract would start July 1st, I just feel, and I know that it's not your fault, but I feel like it gets really tricky for schools to plan ahead to hire people. If we, like normally we would if someone switched from first grade to sixth grade, we'd do a transfer and have our board approve it, in April. So we know we're good to go for the school year and we've got things lined up, even though the contract wouldn't start until July 1st. And if we needed to, we, plan to fall back on local funds. I just want to make sure I'm being compliant while also being as advantageous as we can be.
I think you can follow the normal process that you follow for your other positions that are funded with the title grant. Because again, even if you're reconfiguring a position, but it's still an allowable and the plan is still to be funded in your grant application, you typically, LEAs I know are doing that process in the spring, even though the contract starts on July 1. So I think you can still follow that same process. Unless, again, you have like a particular concern about a position really not being allowable, which from anything I've heard from what you've described, I don't have that concern about an instructional coach.
I don't see any other questions in the chat. We have a few more minutes if anybody has last minute thought.
Well, if there are no other questions, you know where to find us if you have some a little bit later, but hopefully you enjoy your day, and thank you so much for coming today, and reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
So.
Bye.
Tony, you're muted.
Oops, thank you. I was just going to have you stop the recording, Simona, if you haven't stopped it yet. Thank you, Jesse.